There are people who enter a room and without uttering a word, everyone listens, not because they demand attention, but because they invite it. This is not about charm in the classical sense. This is about connection, the kind that makes you feel seen, heard, held. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine being the guy whose words fall flat, who says the right thing at the wrong time, who tries to compliment someone only to watch them recoil. Who knows what they feel but doesn't know how to wrap it in sound? That was Theo. And this is how he changed everything. Theo never had a problem speaking. He had a problem connecting. He could recount facts, debate politics, and deliver sarcastic one-liners that made people laugh in short bursts before looking away. But when it came to telling someone that they mattered or showing interest without sounding like he was reciting a job interview, everything unraveled. He was 29, working as a freelance UX designer. A quiet presence in meetings. Online, he was witty and clever. People followed his threads, liked his memes, DM'd him for tips. But in person, it was like something short-circuited. He'd try to compliment someone's work. That design is really clean. And they'd nod awkwardly, waiting for the warmth that never came. Theo knew how he sounded. Mechanical. Guarded. Like someone translating thoughts from another language, his own emotions barely making it across the border. This realization didn't come suddenly. It built over years. A failed relationship with Mira, who once said, "I feel like I'm dating a closed book that keeps asking me to guess the plot." A fading social circle. Friends who stopped inviting him to things because he seemed like he didn't want to come anyway. The worst was during his cousin's wedding. A girl at his table, a pianist named Sam, talked about how music makes her feel like she's painting emotions in the air. Theo smiled and said, "Cool. Do you play like professionally?" She blinked. "Yeah, I just said I do." He laughed nervously. "Sorry. I meant, do you tour or—" The moment had already passed. Her gaze wandered elsewhere. The connection aborted mid-flight. That night he didn't sleep. He opened Reddit instead. Typed IWTL, how to be a sweet talker. I want to learn how to speak in a way that makes people feel good. Not manipulative, not fake, just warmer. Like I actually care. Because I do. I just sound like I don't. The upvotes rolled in. So did the comments. Some were blunt. Learn to listen. Others were practical. Use people's names, compliment something specific. A few were cynical. You're probably overthinking it. Most people don't care that much, but one stood out. Being a sweet talker isn't about the words. It's about how safe people feel around you. That line hit Theo harder than he expected, because he didn't feel safe with himself. He was terrified of being seen, trying too hard, sounding fake, getting it wrong. So he kept it neutral, polished, non-threatening, forgettable. The next morning he wrote on a sticky note, "Make them feel safe," and stuck it to the corner of his laptop. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something deeper than just talking sweet. It was the beginning of learning how to be with people, really be. And for that, he'd have to start with himself. Theo thought learning to talk sweet would mean studying phrases, practicing tone, smiling more, maybe watching a few TED Talks about charisma. He didn't expect it to dig up parts of himself he'd been quietly avoiding for most of his life. It started with a mirror, not a metaphor, a real one. In a Reddit comment, someone recommended, record yourself talking about something you love, then watch it. Observe not what you say, but how you say it. Theo hated video calls. He always kept his camera off, blamed it on bandwidth. But that night, he sat in front of his laptop, hit record, and started talking about the one thing he genuinely loved: architecture. He spoke for 3 minutes about brutalist design, the intimacy of shadow and concrete, the paradox of cold materials creating warm spaces. Then he hit play. What stared back at him was not what he expected. His voice was flat. His eyes darted away from the camera. His hands never moved. He looked like someone reciting a hostage statement, not a person talking about something he loved. Worse, there was a faint edge of apology in his tone. As if every word came with a silent footnote, "Sorry for bothering you." He closed the laptop and just sat there. It wasn't that he wasn't expressive. It was that he was afraid to be. Sweet talk, he was beginning to understand, wasn't about having the right words. It was about giving yourself permission to be seen using them. But what if being seen meant rejection or worse, pity? When he was 9, Theo once told his mother he wanted to be an actor. She laughed. Not cruelly, just distracted. She said, "You, honey, you're too serious for that." And something in him decided she was right. He remembered that now. The exact timbre of her voice, soft but dismissive, and the way it burrowed itself into his bones. It wasn't just her, there had been many small moments like that. Friends interrupting him when he tried to explain something with passion. Teachers calling him overly intense when he asked too many questions. Dates calling him hard to read. So he became easy to read, neutral, agreeable, quiet. A human screensaver. To be a sweet talker, he realized, wasn't about sugarcoating things. It was about letting your inside show on the outside. It was about revealing you and trusting that it wouldn't be too much. He wasn't ready yet, but he wanted to be. So Theo made a plan. For 30 days, he would talk to one stranger every day, not just small talk, something real, something warm. He started small, the barista at his local cafe. "You remembered my name. That makes my morning." She smiled. "That's literally my job, but thank you." Day 2. The security guard at his co-working space. "I like your shoes. They look like they've seen some adventures." The guard laughed. "You don't even know the half of it." Day 5. A woman reading a novel on the subway. "That's one of my favorite books. The ending ruined me." She looked up surprised. "Wait, you read this?" Each interaction was a risk. But every day the fear got smaller. He was learning that most people weren't waiting to judge him. They were waiting to be seen too. But then came day 9. He complimented a man's jacket in the elevator. The guy looked him up and down and said flatly, "You're trying too hard." And just like that, the old shame came roaring back. Theo laughed it off. But that night he didn't go out. He didn't talk to anyone. He scrolled Reddit, watched videos about social anxiety, went back to old habits, silence, safety, solitude. The next day, he skipped the challenge, and the day after that. And then, in a message from an old friend he hadn't spoken to in months, "Hey, saw your comment on Reddit. That thing about wanting to sound like you care. I felt that. Let me know if you want to talk." Theo stared at the screen. Maybe this wasn't about being impressive. Maybe this was about being honest. Maybe the sweetness didn't come from polish but from presence. He opened his notebook, wrote, "Sweet talk is soft courage." He took a deep breath. It was time to try again. Theo's second attempt at the 30-day challenge wasn't a redemption arc. It was messier, quieter, and much more real. He no longer aimed for daily perfection. Instead, he started setting one rule. Say one thing that shows you were paying attention. Not just compliments, not just small talk. Something that proved he saw the person. That tiny shift changed everything. He began to notice things, the way people's eyes lit up when they mentioned their dog, the pause in their voice when they talked about family, the way someone's body relaxed the moment they felt listened to, not agreed with, not entertained, heard. Sweet talking, he realized, was less about honeyed words and more about emotional listening. And from that listening came the confidence to speak in a way that felt soft but solid, firm but warm. Honest always. It was around this time that he met June. It happened at a bookstore. Theo was flipping through a copy of The Art of Conversation, half for research, half out of boredom, when a voice next to him said, "You're not going to find the answer in that one. Trust me. I've read it twice." He looked up. She was leaning on the shelf with a worn denim jacket and a notebook full of dog-eared pages. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, her eyes unreadable but not cold. Theo managed a crooked smile. "Got a better recommendation." She didn't miss a beat. "Put that down and come grab a coffee. I'll explain the theory of emotional resonance over caffeine. You're clearly desperate." It was a dare, but not a cruel one. They walked to a nearby cafe, talked for over 2 hours. She asked strange questions. If you could bottle your voice and give it to someone you loved, what would you say first? Do you think compliments without vulnerability are just verbal sugar? What's the nicest lie you've ever told? Theo found himself answering without filtering. There was something about her. She wasn't just sweet. She was sharp, unapologetically present. And every time he tried to retreat behind practice phrases, she gently called him out. "Don't do that thing where you talk like you're narrating a product demo," she said once, smirking. "Just tell me how you feel." He blinked. No one had ever asked him that directly, not without wrapping it in a joke or softening the blow. So he told her, "I feel like I've spent most of my life rehearsing how to talk, and now I'm just trying to remember how to mean it." June didn't say anything for a moment. Then she touched his hand lightly. "That's the sweetest thing you've said all day." And the funny part was, he hadn't meant it to be sweet. It just was. Over the next few weeks, they kept meeting, sometimes at bookstores, sometimes at parks. Theo started sharing stories, not polished ones, but real ones. He talked about Mira, about the wedding, about how silence had once felt safer than vulnerability. He told her about the Reddit post, the comment that changed everything, make them feel safe. June listened. She rarely interrupted. But when she did, it was always with something that opened the door wider, not shut it down. "I think you were never bad at talking, Theo," she said once. "You were just afraid that if you really showed up, no one would stay." It was the first time someone had said that without judgment, just fact, like naming a river you'd been drowning in your whole life. Being around her wasn't easy, but it was real. And in that realness, Theo discovered something he hadn't expected. He wasn't just becoming a better speaker. He was becoming a better listener, a better feeler, a better self. He no longer felt the need to script every sentence in his head before speaking. He laughed more. He cried once after reading a poem aloud to her. He stuttered during a compliment, and it still landed, because it was real. But this wasn't the end of the journey. If anything, this was just the first bridge, and bridges lead somewhere. There was one last place he needed to go, back to where it all started, back to the people who once saw him only in fragments, to show them who he was now, not to prove anything, but to connect. Returning is always harder than leaving. Theo had spent months building this new voice, this soft confidence stitched together from truth, vulnerability, and repeated failures. But it's one thing to speak with a stranger who sees you without a past. It's another to sit across from someone who remembers every version of you that you've tried to outgrow. It started with Mira. Not by accident, he planned it. He messaged her on a Sunday morning, "Hey, no expectations. Just wondering if you'd want to grab coffee sometime. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." She replied the same day, "I'd like that. Been a long time." They met at the same cafe they used to argue in, the one with the green tiles and the barista who never smiled. She looked different now. Not older, just softer. Maybe they both were. She ordered an espresso. He got tea. There was a long silence at first, not awkward, just suspended. like two people waiting for the tide to tell them if it was safe to step in. Then she said, "So, what have you been thinking about?" He smiled, but not the tight defensive one. This one had breath in it. "About the way I used to talk to you. Or not talk, really." She tilted her head. "You mean the way you'd shut down whenever I asked how you were feeling?" "Yeah." He paused. "I used to think I was protecting myself, but I realize now I was just hiding. And I confused silence with safety." Mira stirred her espresso, her face unreadable. Then finally, "You were hard to reach, Theo. But I don't think you didn't care. I think you just didn't know how to let it show." There was no accusation in her voice, just memory, and maybe a trace of closure. He nodded. "I've been trying to learn. Still am. It's weird, turns out it's not about learning how to be charming. It's about learning how to be honest without apology." She looked at him, then really looked. "You're different." He laughed. "God, I hope so." They didn't make promises, they didn't plan to keep in touch, but as they hugged goodbye, Mira whispered, "Thank you for not disappearing." He walked out into the cold air feeling lighter than he had in years, not because he fixed something, but because he faced it. That week he made more returns. To his brother, whom he hadn't called in months. To his best friend from college, who once told him, "I never know if you actually want to be here or if you're just too polite to leave." To his father, who had never really talked about emotions, only weather politics and car engines. Each conversation was its own terrain, sometimes gentle, sometimes rocky. But in every one, Theo tried to show up not with speeches, not with performances, but with presence. He practiced what he'd learned. Say their name like it matters. Notice what they're not saying. Ask questions that don't seek control, only connection. Speak not to impress, but to express. Make space for silence. Some people responded with warmth, others with hesitation. One friend even joked, "Who are you, and what did you do with the old Theo?" He smiled and answered, "He's still here, just finally talking." But one return stood out the most. His mother. The woman who once in a passing moment told a 9-year-old boy he was too serious to be an actor, planting a seed of self-doubt that would take decades to unearth. He visited her on a quiet Saturday. She was older now, more tired. The house smelled of rosemary and old wood. They sat on the porch. "I've been thinking about something you said a long time ago," Theo began. "When I told you I wanted to act." She looked surprised. "I don't remember that." "I do," he said. "You told me I was too serious. I don't think you meant it to hurt, but it made me think that expressing myself was wrong or too much." Her face softened. "Theo, I'm sorry. I really don't remember saying that, but I believe you, and I hate that it made you feel that way." He looked at her, then not with blame, but with a kind of peace. "It's okay. I just wanted you to know why I stopped showing you that side of me, and why I'm trying to find it again." She reached for his hand. "I see it now, and I'm proud of you." That evening he drove home in silence, not the kind he used to fill with self-loathing, but the kind that follows a song you don't want to disturb. He thought about all the people he'd spoken to, all the faces that used to fade when he fumbled his words, all the bridges he thought were burned. He was starting to understand something. Being a sweet talker had never been about sugarcoating the truth. It was about daring to let your truth sound sweet, even when it came from a place of pain. It was about returning to your own voice and letting it sing. But one thing still lingered. A single question that June had once asked him, half in jest, half in challenge. What would you say if the world finally stopped to listen? And now, it felt like maybe it had. But what would he say next? By the time Theo stood on that small stage, dim lights above 30 folding chairs below, he wasn't afraid of talking anymore. He was afraid of being heard. It was an open mic night at a community center. Nothing fancy. A corkboard backdrop, mismatched rugs, the kind of space where nervous poets and amateur storytellers go to say things they've only ever whispered in their journals. June had nudged him into it. You've spent months listening, connecting, forgiving. Maybe it's time you declare something. He had laughed at the word declare. It felt too big, too loud. But now, standing behind the microphone, palm slightly damp voice lodged somewhere behind his ribs, he understood what she meant. This wasn't about performance. It was about presence, about offering something fragile and not flinching when it trembled in your hands. He looked up. A woman in the front row smiled at him gently, like she knew what this moment cost. A teenager at the back leaned forward, elbows on knees. Someone shuffled a camera phone into position. Theo took a breath, and then he spoke. For a long time, I thought the goal was to be charming, to say the right thing at the right time with the right tone and win the moment. But I've learned that real connection doesn't live in the sparkle. It lives in the cracks, in the pauses when your voice breaks a little, when your eyes flicker with fear but your words keep going, when someone sees your awkward, unpolished attempt at honesty, and they don't flinch. They stay. I used to think being a sweet talker meant sounding like honey. Now I think it just means making people feel safe enough to be human. The room was quiet when he finished. Not the kind of silence that demands applause, though that came later, but the kind that follows truth. A silence of resonance. People clapped. Some cheered. A man with a notebook gave him a thumbs up, and Theo, he didn't rush off stage. He stayed. Let it settle. Let the connection bloom unforced and unfiltered. Later that night, June found him outside, leaning against the brick wall of the building, looking up at the stars like they might clap too. "You were good," she said. He shrugged, grinning. "I was honest." She nodded. Same thing. They didn't say much more. They didn't need to. That's the thing about sweet talk. It's not always in the volume or even in the words. Sometimes it's just in being there wholly. From that night on, something subtle shifted. Theo began to walk through the world with a new rhythm, not louder but more present. He talked to strangers, not with the intent to impress but to connect. He apologized when he got it wrong. He laughed more, loved deeper, asked questions that scared him. He started helping others too. People from the same Reddit thread messaged him privately. "How did you do it?" "I'm terrified of sounding fake. I feel like my voice doesn't belong in rooms where hearts are open." Theo replied to every message. Not with solutions, but with stories. His own clumsy journey, his fears, his learning curve. Because that was the secret. He hadn't become some poetic genius. He hadn't mastered charisma or memorized the perfect script. He had simply become himself without the armor. And in doing so, he made room for others to do the same. He no longer feared silence or sincerity or the long, slow process of letting people in. He had become the kind of person who could walk into a room and, without needing to speak loudly, make people feel like maybe, just maybe, they belonged there too. And that was the sweetest talk of all. But this wasn't the end. There were still more people to meet. More awkward pauses to fill, more truths to speak, more fears to forgive, more love to give one unfiltered word at a time. Because sweet talk is not the goal. Sweet talk is just the beginning. If you've made it this far, maybe something in Theo's story echoed in you. Maybe you've also stood in front of people trying to say something real, but the words just evaporated. Or maybe you've spent years speaking only in defense, afraid that your softness would be mistaken for weakness. But here's the truth. Your voice doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. It doesn't have to be smooth to be sincere. It just has to be yours. And if you're on a journey of becoming, of reconnecting, of learning how to speak with both clarity and care, you're not alone. This channel is here for that. For stories that don't just inspire, but understand. For reminders that growth doesn't come with applause, it comes with presence. So if this story meant something to you, I invite you. Subscribe. Not just to this channel, subscribe to your own journey. Like this video if it stirred something in you. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they too are allowed to show up unpolished, honest, and still enough. And in the comments, tell me what's one thing you've always wanted to say but never knew how. Let's talk about it. Sweetly, bravely, together.